Viking here. No, wait, I'm not, but today we're talking about the real Vikings and specifically why their age came to an end. But to truly understand why the Viking Age faded into history, we need to talk about sex. Yes, sex. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. First, who were the Vikings? When we think of Vikings, the image of fierce warriors, raiders, and seafarers often comes to mind. The Viking Age began around 793 AD with the infamous raid on the Lindisfarne Monastery and lasted for roughly 300 years, until the mid-11th century. During this time, Vikings from Scandinavia explored, traded, and settled across large parts of Europe, Asia, and even North America. But why did it end? And what does sex have to do with it? Several factors converged to bring the Viking Age to a close. But let's start with the obvious. Military defeats. The Viking expansion met stiff resistance over time. Major defeats, like the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, marked a turning point. King Harold Godwinson's army defeated the Viking forces of Harold Hardrada, essentially stopping large-scale Viking raids in England. Christianization. As the Vikings began converting to Christianity, their traditional raiding culture started to lose its appeal. Christian kings and lords had different priorities, ruling lands rather than plundering them. Not to mention, Christianity came with moral obligations that didn't align too well with raiding monasteries for gold. But what about the Vikings at home? Life in Scandinavia itself began to change. The Scandinavian kingdoms started to centralize, with powerful kings taking control of the region. As these monarchies developed, they organized their own defense systems and fortified towns, making the old Viking lifestyle of raiding and pillaging less practical. This is where sex enters the conversation. When the Vikings expanded outward, their interactions weren't always violent. They also settled, traded, and yes, intermingled with local populations. This created alliances through marriage and relations, integrating them into foreign societies. Viking men, especially chieftains, sought to marry into powerful European families. Through these unions, they gained political and economic power, which further drew them away from the raiding lifestyle and more into diplomatic and sedentary roles. In other words, Vikings weren't just swinging axes, they were making alliances in bed. These marriages led to a merging of cultures and a blending of traditions, which diluted the once distinct Viking identity. So, sex helped bring about the end of the Viking Age in an unexpected way, by creating more connections between Vikings and the rest of Europe, turning conquerors into rulers, raiders into landlords. They weren't just settling lands, they were settling down. The Viking Age didn't end overnight. It faded. As Viking societies adopted Christianity, centralized kingdoms formed, and political alliances replaced the need for conquest. With increasing stability in Europe, there were fewer vulnerable targets, and those who once raided began to focus on trade, farming, and diplomacy. In the end, Vikings weren't defeated by a single event, but were instead absorbed by the very cultures they once plundered. And sex, specifically intermarriage and social integration, played a surprising role in this transformation. So, the next time someone asks why the Viking Age ended, you can tell them it wasn't just swords and battles, but also the softer side of history, diplomacy, alliances, and the intertwining of lives and cultures. And that's the secret to the Vikings' disappearance. They didn't really disappear. They evolved. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.